So Peter was an interesting character. It was Peter, you remember, whose loyalty to Jesus had wavered so much that at the point when Jesus was arrested, he denied even knowing him. And it was Peter who, fairly often throughout the Gospels, showed himself to be maybe a little bit slow, a little bit thick-headed in understanding what Jesus was teaching. But now, after Jesus had indeed died and been resurrected, and after he had gone back to the Father, now Peter seems to have caught on. He was doing what he was supposed to do. Peter was going where the need was. He was going where the hurt was. Sometimes it seems he was even maybe going when he didn't know quite what he was supposed to do when he got there. But he knew he would figure it out. In the years after Jesus' death and resurrection, Peter seems to have come into his own. He was having visions. He was following the Spirit wherever it led. And as sometimes happens with someone like that, Peter was getting in trouble with the people back home in Jerusalem. Because today's reading from Acts would seem to indicate that Peter had gotten himself called back to the conference office in Jerusalem. And he had some explaining to do about what he was doing hanging out with Gentiles. What was he doing out there eating in their homes and ministering to them? And if Peter was going to go slumming with the Gentiles, then why wasn't he at least getting them circumcised after they accepted Christ so that, they could be part of the club? These are all the questions that early church fathers had in Jerusalem. And you read this and you ask yourself, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, what were they thinking? What was the fuss? We cannot put ourselves in that same kind of exclusionary mindset today, can we? Or can we? Is there a part of us that maybe likes having a corner on the truth as we understand it? A part of us that likes being able to say to others with conviction, you just don't understand. You just don't quite get it. You're not one of us, so you don't really understand what I'm trying to say. Maybe that's part of being human. When you ponder that, I want to tell you a tale about two churches. And I'll tell you right at the outset, Parkview is not one of them. And I'm not talking about the early churches in Joppa and Lod or Caesarea and Jerusalem. I'm talking about churches a lot closer to home. Churches in this very state. In this very century. Before I went into ministry, I went to a small church in western County. There was a family that attended church there. Actually, there was a married couple. They had kids that came sometimes, but they didn't come too often because the kids were adults. They had their own things going on. And within the last 10 years or so, now, their youngest son graduated from college. I think he went into engineering. And he went to college in Milwaukee, which is just a little bit up the road from where we were. And because he had been raised in a faithful home, college student, decided he wanted to go to church. And because he had been raised by good Methodists, he decided he wanted to go to a Methodist church. So he did what any reasonable, logical engineering student would do. He got out the yellow pages and he flipped them open and said, oh, found me a Methodist church in Milwaukee. So he went there one Sunday and they welcomed him. You know, they were all smiles. Somebody had told them about radical hospitality. You know, it was one of those things where you practically swarm and you do when you walk in. They shook his hand and they asked him his name. They did all the things that they should do. He sat through church, knew all the hymns. After church, he hit it right, because after church they had coffee and cookies. They fed him, or gave him coffee and they fed him cookies. All the things a college student would like. They had beer. And in the course of this after church time, they asked him what he did, and he said, well, I'm a student at whatever school. I think it was UWM. I'm a student at UWM, and I'm going to be graduating in a couple of years. I was looking for a place to go to worship. And the people who welcomed him said, oh, so you're single then? And he said, well, yeah, I'm a college student. I'm single. So... And these good people, very concerned about his comfort and his well-being, they looked at him with great care and compassion. And they said, you know, we don't think you'll be comfortable here. We're more of a family-oriented church, so you probably need to go somewhere else. You know, you'll like it more. It's for your own good. Open hearts, open minds, open doors. Don't let the doors hit you on the way out. Now a sane person hears that and goes, wow, what a bunch of hypocritical losers. How could they do something like that? You know, if you've heard about radical hospitality in the church, and all of the things that we're supposed to do to welcome people, you hear a story like that and you think, I don't get how people do that. You cringe inside. Hold that thought. Now this church that we went to, my family and I, one of the things we did, that we started a couple of years before I left, was every summer we would have a chicken dinner and a classic car show. Chicken was barbecued outside. People would come and they'd have chicken and corn on the grill. And they'd sit at these long tables and eat and have lemonade and food and fellowship, and they would get to look at classic cars. They had contests to see who had the best restored car, things like that. One of our church members had a VW thing. If you know about those, they're kind of like, it's a Volkswagen's answer to the Jeep from back in the 70s, I think. And he would give kids a ride around the block. So this very neat, family-oriented event. And people from all over the county and from right across the border, they would come and they'd look at the cars and they'd eat chicken and they'd socialize, and it was a family time. That first year, when the dinner was in full swing and the people were sitting and eating and they were enjoying the company and they were looking at cars, this young man showed up. He was kind of, no, he wasn't kind of, he was very scruffy looking. Looked like he might not have had a bath or a shower in a while. Looking back, I suspect he was homeless, but I don't know that for sure. He wore jeans that had worn spots and holes in them that were not meant to be that way. They weren't a fashion statement. They were just old. And he came up to the ticket table and he said, "You know, I don't have any money. I'm really hungry. I could really use some food if you can spare some for me and for my friend." He explained that his friend was sitting up on the front of the church. This was in the back parking lot. He explained that his friend was sitting on the steps in the front because he was too embarrassed to come and ask for food. Before I go on, I also want to finish the picture of this man. He was wearing an Andrew Dice Clay graphic t-shirt. Anybody remember Andrew Dice Clay? Yeah. From the laugh, I know you do. He was controversial, which is a nice way to put it. But he was wearing this Andrew Dice Clay t-shirt. And it was so graphic and offensive that I thought about this for like 2 days this week, trying to figure out how I could tell you what it said, even, euphemistically. And I can't. It was just really bad. Went way beyond suggestive. And I tell you that because I think maybe it was the fact that he was wearing this shirt that caused what happened next, because what happened next was nothing. He had asked for food, and the person at the ticket table didn't just say, "Sure, you're hungry. Here's food." Instead, he looked at him. I think looked at the crowd, the rest of the people there, and thought, "Wow, he does not fit in." So instead of responding to him, they just bucked the question up a couple of people up the line until they got to the people who were in charge of the picnic, or in charge of the dinner, and thankfully they both said, "Yeah, we're a church. You're hungry, of course we'll feed you." So he gave him a carry-out container of food for himself and his friend, and he took it back up front and they ate. We never saw him again. Looking back on that, I would hope and I would like to think that he remembers that day he got fed by a group of Christians. And not that we hesitated. I hope that he remembers the grace that we showed instead of the judgment. And I talked to Rachel about this just recently, to see if my memory was right. She said the only thing that really bothers her about this incident was that nobody said yes faster. As I said, I'd like to think that it was the shirt. That we allowed ourselves to be offended by what he was wearing. Maybe even by who he seemed to be. Instead of responding at once to who he was. And that was somebody who needed help. That's not a good excuse, but it would be a better reason at least than just to think we didn't want to help him. And all of this might not seem to relate to the vision that Peter had of all of these animals being brought before him and being told to eat, kill, and eat. It may not seem to have much to do with the dissolving of barriers between Jew and Gentile that was just starting to happen in that first century. And it doesn't seem like it has much to do with the willingness to take circumcision off the table so that even the uncircumcised would be welcomed into the church. I think it has everything to do with it. Because all of that leads to the question that we have to ask ourselves. And we ask ourselves here, and we ask ourselves this as a denomination, and we ask ourselves even as the larger Christian church. Who are we here to serve? Who's our target audience? What's our target demographic? If there is one thing that Jesus taught, it was that it was about service. It was about love. You know, I told you a couple of very disturbing stories about how not to serve people, and you're probably thinking, okay, we know better than that. And I think we do. But deep in their hearts, I like to think that those other churches did too. But that they allowed themselves instead to be kind of drawn away from what they knew into what their prejudices were. That's what we have to be wary of. And we can be as hospitable as heck on Sunday, but the real test for the church, or a church, comes on Monday through Saturday. Because what messages do we send, either unintentionally or intentionally? Or who do we make maybe feel uncomfortable by something that's said even as an offhanded comment or a joke or a sarcastic remark? Because it's about love. We love that. John tells us in his gospel that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, etc. We all know that scripture. We have been programmed by Sunday school and the NFL. Somebody says John 3:16, we know what they're talking about. God so loved the world. And that's great. 2,000 years ago, love looked like Jesus coming to earth and dying for us. But now, 2,000 years later, the question is, what does the love of God look like? If we are the inheritors of God's love and the messengers of God's grace, we have to figure out what that looks like in action. And that's the key, in action. Because the kind of love that God had for us, that was not a noun. That was a verb. That was an action thing. So how do we take that love that we know is ours and make it mean something today? How do we touch people? How do we heal people? How do we bring them to Jesus? But it's not enough to just know that Jesus loves us. The challenge for the church today, and this is the church in general, the challenge for the church is to show that Jesus loves us. And that he loves everybody else as well. God's love is not exclusionary, and we have to figure out how to translate that into our world today and every day. How can we show the love that we know is ours? Better yet, how can we show others the love that we know is theirs?